The golden lights of the Grand Sterling Hotel glowed like fire against the night sky. Expensive cars lined the red carpet, and the sound of laughter echoed through the wide marble halls. It was the night of the annual Sterling Gala, where billionaires, politicians, and celebrities gathered to show their power and pretend to be kind. Among the crowd, in a dark uniform and worn shoes, a janitor named Marcus Hill quietly mopped the marble floor near the grand piano. He kept his head down, avoiding the eyes of the guests who passed him as if he were invisible. No one spoke to him. No one even looked at him. To them, he was just another servant, someone who belonged in the shadows. But Marcus wasn't watching them. He was looking at the piano, a beautiful black Steinway grand that sat in the middle of the room like a sleeping giant. The piano shone under the chandelier lights, and every time he passed it, something inside him stirred. It had been years since he had touched one. At that moment, Mr. Richard Sterling, the owner of the hotel and one of the richest men in the city, stood near the piano with a glass of wine in his hand. His daughter, Elena Sterling, was beside him, a young woman known for her beauty, charm, and cold smile. She wore a silver gown that glittered like moonlight. Around them, a group of rich guests laughed, talking about art, music, and money. A man from the group, a young businessman trying to impress Elena, said, "They say no one here can play this piano properly." "Only geniuses can," Elena smirked. "Then it will probably stay silent tonight," she said. Everyone laughed. Just then, Marcus walked past, pushing his mop bucket. The young man pointed at him and said jokingly, "Hey, maybe the janitor can play. What do you say, Elena? Let him try." The group burst into laughter. Marcus froze for a moment, his eyes on the floor. He didn't look angry, just calm. He knew what they meant. They weren't really offering him a chance. They were mocking him, but Elena, amused by the joke, played along. She tilted her head and said in a playful but proud tone, "All right then. If he can play this piano beautifully," she paused, her lips curling into a smile, "I'll marry him." The room roared with laughter. Even her father chuckled, shaking his head. "You're too generous, my dear. The man probably doesn't even know which end of the piano to touch." Marcus lifted his eyes slowly. For a second, he looked straight at her. His eyes weren't angry or ashamed. They were calm, deep like the sea before a storm. "I'll play," he said quietly. The laughter stopped. The young man smirked. You know how to play?" Marcus nodded. "I do." The crowd gathered closer. Phones came out. Some guests whispered, "This will be funny." Others said, "He's crazy." Elena crossed her arms, still smiling but a little uncertain now. Marcus walked to the piano, his boots echoing against the marble. He touched the smooth black surface with trembling fingers as if greeting an old friend after many years. "Do you even know what you're doing?" someone muttered. Marcus didn't answer. He sat down, took a deep breath, and closed his eyes. For a long second, no sound came from the piano. The guests started to whisper again, but then the first note rang out. It was soft, slow, almost like a heartbeat. Then another, and another. Soon the melody filled the room, gentle, sad, beautiful. It wasn't just music. It was emotion. Every note spoke of pain, hope, and memory. It told a story without words, and the story of a man who had loved and lost, who had fallen and risen again. The guests stopped talking. Their smiles faded. Even the waiters froze in place. The air changed, heavy with feeling. Elena stood still, her eyes fixed on Marcus. The playful smile was gone. Something deep inside her stirred, something she couldn't name. The man she had mocked was playing like a master, like someone who carried the world inside his hands. When the song reached its peak, Marcus's hands moved faster, precise, powerful, graceful. The chandelier lights reflected off his face, showing tears in his eyes. He wasn't playing for them. He was playing for someone he had lost long ago, his mother, who once told him, "If the world laughs at you, let your music answer." When the final note fell into silence, the room stayed still. No one clapped. No one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped breathing for a moment. Then slowly someone began to clap. Then another. And another. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with applause. Marcus stood up quietly and looked around. His eyes met Elena's. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in her life, she felt small, humbled, amazed. Marcus gave a small nod, picked up his mop and said softly, "Thank you for listening." He walked away, leaving behind a room full of stunned billionaires, and one girl who couldn't stop staring at the janitor who played like a genius. The music had ended, but its echo stayed in the room like perfume in the air. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the clinking of glasses had stopped. It was as if time itself had paused to remember what had just happened. Marcus stood by the piano, his rough hands resting on the polished wood. The golden lights from the chandeliers reflected off his dark skin, making him look almost carved from bronze. He didn't smile, didn't bow. He only breathed, slow and quiet, like a man who had just spoken his heart in a language only a few could understand. Elena Sterling still stood where she had been. The laughter that once danced in her eyes was gone. Her chest rose and fell slowly as though she had forgotten how to breathe. Her friends whispered around her, unsure whether to laugh again or stay silent. The young businessman who had mocked Marcus first cleared his throat. Guess he got lucky," he said weakly, but no one laughed this time. Her father, Mr. Richard Sterling, broke the silence. "Impressive," he said, his voice heavy and forced. "Quite unexpected. But we have guests to entertain. Let's move on." He clapped twice for the orchestra to play again, but even they hesitated, unsure whether to touch their instruments after what they had just heard. Marcus quietly turned away. He picked up his mop and bucket, the sound of the wheels echoing in the quiet hall. People moved aside for him, not out of kindness but confusion. They didn't know whether to pity him or respect him. As he reached the corner of the hall, he stopped and looked back. His eyes met Elena's again. For a second, neither of them spoke. She wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a question, but her throat tightened. Marcus simply nodded once, as if saying, "It's all right. I understand." Then he walked through the side door and disappeared into the service hallway. Outside, the city was covered in soft rain. Marcus stepped into the cool night, the sound of the water mixing with the distant hum of traffic. He sat on the hotel's back steps, taking off his gloves. His fingers were red from cleaning chemicals, rough from years of hard work. He stared at them, the same hands that had just made a room full of powerful people fall silent. He smiled faintly. "Mama, you'd laugh if you saw me tonight," he whispered. In his mind, he could still hear her voice, warm, gentle, full of pride. "Marcus, the piano isn't about money or fame. It's about truth. Play it with your soul and it'll never lie." He had stopped playing years ago after his mother passed away. The piano they had owned was sold to pay hospital bills. Since then, he'd worked small jobs, cleaning, carrying, surviving. But tonight, something inside him had come back to life, something he thought was gone forever. He looked up at the hotel windows. Behind the glass, people were laughing again, pretending the moment never happened. Yet one window stayed still. Elena was there, her silhouette framed by light. She stood with her hands on the glass, watching him. Inside the ballroom, Elena couldn't shake off what she had just felt. The laughter around her sounded empty now. She tried to smile when people spoke to her, but her mind kept replaying the music. Every note felt like it was written for her, or against her pride. Her father came to her side. "Elena," he said in his usual commanding tone, "forget that little performance. It was nothing." She turned to him. "It wasn't nothing," she whispered. "What? It wasn't just music, Father. It was beautiful." He frowned. "He's a janitor, Elena. Don't romanticize a moment. People like him stay in their place for a reason." His words felt cold. She looked away, biting her lip. For the first time, her father's world, full of luxury and arrogance, felt small. Later that night, when the guests were gone and the hall was empty, Elena quietly walked to the piano. The lights were dim and the air smelled of champagne and roses. She sat on the same bench Marcus had used and touched the keys softly. Her fingers trembled. The sound that came out was broken, uneven. She laughed nervously. "How did he do it?" she whispered to herself. She tried again, pressing random notes, but they sounded hollow. There was no soul, no magic. Just sound. She closed her eyes, remembering the way Marcus's hands had moved, with confidence, with feeling. For the first time in her life, she felt small, not because of shame, but because she realized how little she truly knew about life beyond her golden cage. Down in the maintenance room, Marcus sat alone on a wooden stool. The other janitors had left. He was cleaning his old shoes, humming softly. In the corner of the room lay a small wooden box. Inside were old photographs of his mother, a few piano sheets, and a medal from a music competition he had won as a boy. He took out one of the sheets, wrinkled and yellow, and smiled sadly. "Guess the world heard you again, Mama," he whispered. "Just for one night." Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Marcus looked up. It was late, almost midnight. The door opened slowly, and to his shock, Elena Sterling stepped in. She looked different now. No jewels, no makeup, just a simple white dress and nervous eyes. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," she said softly. Marcus stood up, surprised. "Miss Sterling? You shouldn't be down here." "I had to see you," she said. I wanted to know how you did that." "Did what?" "Played like that. Made everyone feel something real." Marcus looked at her quietly. "You listen with your ears," he said. "I played with my heart." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, two very different worlds stood inches apart. The billionaire's daughter and the janitor who had just reminded her what real beauty sounded like. The rain had softened into a quiet drizzle by morning. The world outside was waking up, but inside the hotel's staff quarters, Marcus was still lost in thought. He sat on the edge of his small bed, holding a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. His mind kept replaying the night before him, the way the crowd had stared, the silence after his last note, and Elena's eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. For years, he had swept floors and cleaned rooms for people who never remembered his name, but for a few minutes last night the world had listened. They hadn't seen a janitor. They had seen him. He sighed, setting the cup down. "It doesn't change anything," he muttered. "Tomorrow it'll be like it never happened." But Marcus was wrong. The world had already started to talk. In the morning, the Sterling Gala video had gone viral. Someone had secretly recorded Marcus playing the piano. The clip showed him sitting in his faded uniform, his hands dancing across the keys as a room full of billionaires watched in disbelief. The caption read, "The janitor who played like a king." Within hours, the video had spread across social media. Comments flooded in. "Pure talent! This man deserves the world. Shame on them for mocking him." TV networks wanted interviews. Music schools wanted to know who he was, but Marcus didn't know any of this yet. He was still pushing his cleaning cart through the hotel corridors, humming softly, unaware that his life had already changed. Upstairs, in her bright room overlooking the city, Elena scrolled through her phone and froze. Her heart raced as she saw the video, the one she hadn't known existed. The comments made her cheeks burn. She watched herself laughing in the background while Marcus played his soul out.
Each replay felt like a slap of guilt. "Oh God," she whispered.
"What did I do?" Her father walked in just then. "Elena, you've seen the news, I assume?" She nodded silently. He continued sharply. "I've already told my PR team to handle it. They'll say it was a friendly performance, nothing more." "But it wasn't," she said. "You humiliated him." Her father frowned. "Watch your tone, young lady. You're not responsible for what a janitor chooses to do." "He didn't choose it, Father," she said softly. "We forced him to." He sighed, frustrated. "You're getting emotional. This will blow over in a day or two. The world forgets quickly." But for once, Elena hoped the world wouldn't forget. Later that day, Marcus was cleaning the main lobby when a group of journalists rushed in. "Excuse me, sir," one said breathlessly. "Are you Marcus Hill, the pianist from last night?" Marcus blinked, unsure. "Pianist? No, I just work here." "But you played at the gala, didn't you?" Well, yes, but it was nothing serious." The journalists smiled, shaking their heads. "It was incredible, sir. You've gone viral. Millions have seen your video." Marcus froze.
"Millions?"
"Yes, you're a sensation. People are calling you the hidden maestro." Before he could answer, the hotel manager rushed over, red-faced. "What is the meaning of this?" "Marcus, get back to work." The reporters protested, but Marcus just nodded quietly and pushed his cart away. His heart was racing. He didn't know whether to be proud or afraid. That night, after his shift, Marcus walked past the piano again. The hall was empty, quiet, golden light spilling through the tall windows. He sat down and touched the keys gently, almost afraid. He played again, not for an audience this time, but for himself. The music flowed easily, like a river finally finding its path. He smiled, eyes closed, remembering his mother's words. You were born to play, not to hide. As the melody filled the room, a soft sound came from behind. Footsteps. He turned slightly. Elena stood there watching him again. I thought I'd never hear that again, she said quietly. Marcus gave a small smile. Guess I can't stop once I start. She walked closer, her heels clicking softly. The world knows about you now, she said. You're famous. He chuckled. Fame doesn't clean the floors. Elena bit her lip. You're humble. That's rare, Marcus looked up at her. Miss Sterling, people like me learn to be humble. Life doesn't give us much choice, she lowered her gaze. You were amazing, Marcus. I'm sorry for what I said last night. It was cruel. He shook his head. You weren't cruel. You were honest about what you believed. Maybe the music just changed what you believe. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time saw not a worker, not a man in a uniform, but someone full of quiet strength. The next morning, the hotel was flooded with calls and media requests. Mr. Sterling was furious. That man is not talking to anyone, he barked. He's an employee, not a performer. But it was too late. A famous music producer had already sent a letter requesting to meet Marcus. When Marcus opened the envelope later that day, his hands trembled. It read, We saw your video. We'd like to offer you a chance to record. Your talent deserves to be heard. He didn't know what to do. He had dreamed of this moment once, years ago, before life took everything from him. But now it was real, terrifyingly real. He looked around at his small room, the uniform hanging by the door, the bucket of cleaning tools. Then he looked at the letter again and whispered, Maybe Mama was right. Maybe it's not too late to dream again. Outside, the city buzzed with excitement over the mysterious janitor pianist. But in his heart, Marcus felt something far deeper than fame. Freedom. For the first time in years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt alive. And somewhere in that same city, Elena Sterling watched the same news on her screen, whispering to herself, He played the world. And somehow he played my heart too. The city lights shimmered against the night sky like stars that had fallen too low. Inside his small apartment above a grocery store, Marcus sat on the edge of his bed with the letter from the record company still in his hands. The paper trembled slightly, not because he was afraid of what it said, but because he couldn't believe it was real. He had read it 100 times already. We would love to hear you play. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. For a man who spent the last 10 years scrubbing floors, this invitation felt like a dream too fragile to touch. He placed the letter gently beside an old photograph of his mother. Her smile stared back at him, kind and proud. You always said the piano would find me again, he whispered. Maybe it finally did. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with tension. Reporters still gathered outside, hoping to catch a glimpse of the janitor pianist. Mr. Richard Sterling was furious. The last thing he wanted was for his elite hotel to become the center of a viral scandal. Where is that man? He shouted at his manager. Tell Marcus Hill he's not to speak to the press. He cleans floors, not headlines. The manager nodded nervously. Yes, sir. But the guests? They're asking about him. Some say his music made the gala worth attending. Richard scowled. They're fools. Emotions fade. Money doesn't. But not everyone felt that way. In the staff hallway, Marcus continued his usual work quietly. Some co-workers smiled at him now. Others looked at him with envy. One whispered, Man, you're famous now. Why are you still here? Marcus just smiled softly. Because fame doesn't pay rent until it's real. He kept his head down, but inside he felt a quiet pride. Every time he passed the piano in the lobby, he paused for a second, just to touch it gently. It reminded him of his mother, his past, and the boy he used to be. That afternoon, Elena appeared again. She was dressed simply, no diamonds, no camera flashes, just a soft white sweater and a notebook in hand. She waited until the hall was empty before walking up to him. Marcus, she said softly. He turned surprised. Miss Sterling. Please, she said. Just call me Elena. He nodded, unsure. All right, Elena, what brings you here again? She hesitated, then asked, I wanted to know who you really are. Marcus smiled faintly. A janitor, mostly. No, she said, stepping closer. That's not all. You play like someone who lived music, not someone who just learned it. Who taught you? For a moment, Marcus didn't answer. His eyes grew distant, like he was looking through time itself. My mother, he said quietly. She was a piano teacher. Not rich, not famous, just someone who loved music more than life itself. Elena listened intently. When I was 5, he continued, she used to make me sit beside her while she played. Said every note had a story. We didn't have much, but when she played, the world felt rich. He paused, swallowing hard. When she got sick, we couldn't afford the hospital. I sold the piano to pay for her treatment. But it wasn't enough. She died in that hospital bed, and I swore I'd never touch a piano again. Not without her. Elena's eyes shimmered. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Marcus smiled gently. Don't be. Last night was the first time I played again. I guess I wanted her to hear me one more time wherever she is. There was silence, soft, heavy, meaningful. Then Elena said, she would be proud of you. He looked at her, really looked at her. And for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. Meanwhile, upstairs in his grand office, Mr. Sterling was on the phone with his PR manager. I don't care if he can play Beethoven backwards, he snapped. This story dies now. Do you understand? My daughter's name is not to be linked with a janitor, but fate doesn't obey the rich. By evening, a journalist had published an article titled, The Hidden Genius of Marcus Hill, the Janitor Who Stunned the Elite. It told Marcus's full story, his childhood, his mother, his struggles. The piece spread like wildfire. People all over the country were inspired. They called him the soul of the streets. By nightfall, TV networks were offering him interviews, and a famous foundation wanted to fund his music education. When Marcus found out, he was speechless. All this for one song? He murmured. Elena smiled softly. No, Marcus, not for one song, for what that song made people feel. The next day, when Marcus arrived for work, he was stopped by 2 security guards. Mr. Hill, one said awkwardly. Mr. Sterling wants to see you in his office. Marcus nodded and walked in calmly. Richard Sterling stood behind his desk, his face stone cold. Sit down, he said. Marcus remained standing. I'll make this simple, Richard said. You've had your 15 minutes of fame, congratulations, but I run a hotel, not a circus. I can't have my employees turning into celebrities. It's bad for image, Marcus stayed quiet. So I'm offering you a deal. You can take a small bonus. Sign a paper saying you won't speak to the press and keep your job. Or, he paused, you can leave. Marcus looked down, then slowly met his eyes. You're afraid of me, he said softly. Richard frowned. Excuse me. You're afraid that people might start seeing me as more than what you think I am. The older man's jaw tightened. Watch your tone. Marcus nodded politely. Thank you for everything, sir. But I think I'll leave. He turned to walk away, and for the first time in years, Richard Sterling was left speechless. Outside, Elena was waiting by the lobby doors. He smiled faintly when he saw her. Looks like I'm unemployed. She grinned gently. Then maybe it's time to start something new. The 2 of them stepped out into the afternoon light, unaware that Marcus's story was about to become something far bigger than either of them imagined. The city felt different that morning. Maybe it was the sunlight. Maybe it was the way people smiled at strangers. Or maybe it was because of one man, a janitor who had played the piano like no one else could. Marcus walked through the streets with a small bag slung over his shoulder, his old uniform folded neatly inside. He didn't know where he was going exactly, just forward. For the first time in years, he had no mop, no floor to clean, and no one ordering him around. The air tasted like freedom. He found a small cafe on the corner of Willow Street and sat down with a cup of cheap coffee. On the cafe's TV, the morning news was showing his face again. Social media continues to celebrate Marcus Hill, the janitor who stunned the elite Sterling Gala with a moving piano performance. Offers from music schools and record labels are pouring in. Marcus stared at the screen, shaking his head with disbelief. The reporter called him a hidden genius, but he didn't feel like one. He was just a man who missed his mother and found her again through music. He smiled quietly. You really did it, Mama, he whispered. You made the world listen. Across town, Elena was in her father's office, standing her ground for the first time in her life. You can't control everything, Father, she said firmly. Richard Sterling slammed his hand on the desk. That man embarrassed me. Us. You think this is a fairy tale? A janitor and a billionaire's daughter. The world will laugh. Let them laugh, Elena said softly. They laughed at him too, remember? And look how that turned out. Her father pointed at her angrily. You are not to see him again. Do you understand me? But Elena didn't answer. She just turned and walked out of the office, her mind already made up. Meanwhile, Marcus sat at the small cafe piano, an old wooden thing with a few broken keys. The cafe owner, an older woman with kind eyes, approached him. You're that piano man from the news, aren't you? She asked. Marcus smiled shyly. Guilty. Well, she said, crossing her arms with a grin, you can play here anytime you want. No fancy crowd, just people who love music. He thanked her and began to play, soft, warm notes that drifted through the cafe like sunlight through curtains. Customers stopped eating. The barista stopped pouring coffee. Even people walking outside paused to listen, and someone else had stopped too, just outside the window. Elena. She stood there watching him play with that same quiet intensity as the first night. When he finally looked up, their eyes met through the glass. She smiled, shyly, nervously, then stepped inside. Didn't think I'd see you again, Marcus said softly. I couldn't stay away, Elena replied. I heard you were free now. He chuckled. Guess I am. But freedom's expensive. She sat across from him. Maybe I can help with that. He raised an eyebrow. You? Miss Billionaire's daughter? Elena smiled gently. Just Elena now. She told him that she'd left her father's company. He said I was foolish to believe in you, she said. But I think the foolish thing is living without believing in something real. Marcus looked at her quietly for a long time. You sure you want to throw away comfort for this? She nodded. For truth, yes. The cafe owner, listening from behind the counter, whispered to herself, Well, I'll be damned. That's love if I've ever seen it. A week later, Marcus received an invitation from a television show called America's Hidden Talent. They wanted him to perform live on stage. It was his chance to step into the spotlight completely, but fear crept in. I don't belong there, he told Elena that night. She shook her head. You don't belong to anyone's idea, Marcus. You belong to music. He looked into her eyes and saw the same courage he once thought he'd lost. All right, he said finally. Let's do it. The night of the show came. The stage lights blinded him for a moment as he walked out. The audience murmured, some recognizing him, others skeptical. He was just a man in a plain suit, no luxury, no fame. But when his fingers touched the keys, silence fell. He played the same song he had played at the gala. But this time, it was different. It was freer, louder, fuller. It wasn't a cry anymore. It was a triumph. Every note soared higher. Every pause breathed emotion. The audience erupted when he finished. People stood. Some cried. The judges were speechless at first. Then one finally said, You reminded us that music isn't about perfection. It's about heart. And yours fills the room. Marcus smiled softly, tears in his eyes. Thank you, he said. I play for those who were told they weren't enough. Because sometimes the world just needs to listen before it judges. Backstage, Elena waited for him, her eyes glowing with pride. When he walked toward her, the crowd chanting his name behind them, she whispered, You did it. He smiled. No, he said. We did. As the lights dimmed and the applause echoed, Marcus realized something deeper than fame had begun. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was everyone's who had ever been ignored, mocked, or silenced. The janitor the world once laughed at was now teaching that same world how to hear. And as the curtain fell, one truth shone brighter than the stage lights. Genius has no uniform. It just needs a chance to be heard. The next morning, the world woke up to Marcus Hill's name everywhere. From janitor to genius, the performance that melted millions. The video from the TV show had already crossed 50 million views overnight. People from every corner of the world shared his story. A man who came from nothing, who played not for fame but for truth. Marcus sat in his small apartment, staring at the endless flood of messages on his phone. There were interviews, collaborations, and even invitations from orchestras. But one message stood out, short, simple, and unbelievable. It read, "We would be honored if you performed at the Royal Charity Gala in London, attended by the world's most influential figures." Marcus blinked, thinking it must be a mistake. He read it again, then whispered to himself, "London? Me?" The letter ended with one more line that made his heart pause. "We would also like to invite Miss Elena Sterling to join you for the duet performance." When Elena arrived at his apartment that evening, Marcus showed her the letter. Her eyes widened. "The Royal Gala?" she whispered. "That's incredible." He smiled nervously. "Incredible or impossible?" She laughed softly. "You forget who you are now." "The world's listening, Marcus," but he looked uncertain. "I'm just a man who used to clean floors." Elena shook her head. "No, you're the man who cleaned the dust off people's hearts." There was silence for a moment, the kind that carried more emotion than words ever could. Finally, Elena said, "We'll go together." The weeks that followed were a blur. Rehearsals, interviews, endless planning. Elena and Marcus spent long hours at the piano, practicing their duet. She wasn't an expert, but Marcus had a way of teaching that made her believe she could be. "Don't think of the notes," he told her gently. "Think of the story behind them." "And what's our story?" she asked playfully. He smiled. "Two worlds that were never meant to meet, until music made them listen." At first her fingers stumbled, but slowly she began to follow his rhythm. Sometimes she'd laugh at her mistakes and Marcus would shake his head, grinning. Even the wrong notes sound beautiful when you play with heart. Those days were simple, filled with quiet laughter, spilled coffee, and the sound of shared dreams. When the night of the gala finally came, London glowed under a silver sky. The red carpet stretched like a river of light as limousines arrived one after another. Inside the grand hall, chandeliers shimmered above a sea of elegant gowns and tuxedos. Mr. Richard Sterling was there too, not as a proud father, but as an invited guest who didn't know whether to feel shame or admiration. He hadn't spoken to Elena since she left home. But when he saw her name on the event's program, duet performance Marcus Hill and Elena Sterling, his heart skipped. He leaned toward a business partner and whispered, "This is madness." The man replied quietly, "No, Richard. This is history." Backstage, Marcus stood beside Elena. He wore a simple black suit, his hands trembling slightly. Elena noticed and gently touched his arm. "You okay?" she asked. He exhaled deeply. "Just thinking of her." "Your mother?" He nodded. "She used to dream I'd play somewhere like this." "Guess she was right." Elena smiled softly. "Then let's make her proud." The announcer's voice echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Marcus Hill and Miss Elena Sterling." The crowd erupted in applause as the two stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed. Mr. Sterling leaned forward in disbelief, watching his daughter walk toward the same piano where a janitor once sat humiliated. Marcus took his seat, and Elena sat beside him. She looked nervous, but he whispered, "Just follow me, and play like you mean it." The first note floated through the hall like a whisper, then another. Slowly, the duet began. A conversation between two hearts that had once been worlds apart. Marcus's hands moved like water, smooth and confident. Elena followed, sometimes hesitating, sometimes flowing perfectly in tune. The melody built into something larger than sound. It was forgiveness, love, and courage wrapped together. When their eyes met mid-performance, the entire hall seemed to vanish. There were no billionaires, no cameras, no judgments, just two souls and one truth. They were free. The final note faded into silence, and for a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then applause thundered through the hall. People stood up, shouting their names. Some had tears in their eyes. Elena looked around in shock, then back at Marcus. He smiled, whispering, "See? Even wrong notes can sound beautiful." As they stood to bow, Marcus noticed someone standing near the back, Mr. Sterling. He wasn't clapping. He was just standing still, eyes glassy, face unreadable. Later, backstage, as photographers surrounded them, Mr. Sterling appeared. The crowd parted. "Father," Elena began nervously. He held up a hand. "Don't speak," he said softly. "I just came to say, I was wrong." Both of them froze. The proud man's voice trembled slightly. "I thought money made people great, but tonight I saw something greater. You reminded me what humanity sounds like." He turned to Marcus. "You didn't just play music, son. You played dignity. Forgive me for not seeing you sooner. Marcus's throat tightened. He nodded respectfully. You don't owe me anything, sir. I just wanted her to see what love can sound like. Elena's eyes filled with tears as her father placed a hand on her shoulder for the first time in years. You both did something I never could, he said. You made people feel. That night, as they stepped out into the cold London air, snow began to fall, and soft, white, pure. Elena leaned on Marcus's shoulder. We really did it, didn't we? He smiled. No, we're just getting started. And somewhere above them, in the quiet between the snowflakes, Marcus swore he could hear faint music, the sound of a mother's pride, echoing through heaven. The night after the royal gala felt like a dream that refused to fade. Every newspaper headline carried the same image, Marcus Hill and Elena Sterling standing side by side, bowing before a roaring crowd. A love written in music. The janitor who played his way into history. Elena Sterling defies class, performs with former janitor. The story had broken every wall between wealth and poverty, between shame and pride, between two worlds that were never meant to meet. Marcus sat by the window of his London apartment, watching the city lights glitter like fallen stars. He held a cup of tea in one hand and his mother's old locket in the other. Inside it was a faded photo, a boy with a piano and a woman smiling beside him. You'd laugh if you saw this, Mama, he whispered with a soft chuckle. They're calling me a legend now. Can you believe that? The memory of her voice came back like a song. Play with your heart, and the world will remember your soul. He closed his eyes and smiled. Guess they finally did. Across the city, Elena sat in a hotel suite filled with flowers, letters, and gifts from strangers. Reporters wanted interviews. Brands wanted endorsements. But all she wanted was peace. And Marcus. Her father had returned to the U.S. quietly, telling the press he was proud of her courage to follow her passion. But behind that polished statement was a simple truth. He had been humbled. Elena turned off her phone and stared out at the London skyline. Maybe he was right about one thing, she whispered to herself. Money can buy everything, except meaning. She thought of Marcus's hands, the same hands that once pushed a mop, now commanding the respect of millions. Every time he played, she felt something pure, something no fame could ever give. A week later, Marcus and Elena were invited to perform again, this time in New York, at the International Music Honors. It would be broadcast live to more than 100 countries. When they arrived, the city was alive with excitement. Banners with Marcus's name hung in Times Square. Strangers stopped him for photos, calling him the man who made the world cry. Backstage, as the final preparations began, Elena could sense that something was different about Marcus. He seemed calm, too calm. His eyes held a secret she couldn't read. You okay? She asked, smiling. He nodded. I'm more than okay. The stage lights dimmed. The announcer's voice echoed across the vast auditorium. Please welcome the man whose story touched millions, Marcus Hill and his partner in harmony, Elena Sterling. The audience rose in applause. The two walked out hand in hand, bathed in golden light. The piano stood in the center, gleaming under the spotlight, waiting like an old friend. Marcus sat down first, then looked at Elena. Ready? She nodded. Always. He began to play. The melody was slow at first, tender, familiar. It was the same song from the gala, but something about it was softer now, almost like a goodbye and a promise at the same time. Elena joined in halfway through, her hands steady, her eyes locked on his. Together they created something beyond sound, something human, eternal. The crowd sat frozen, many wiping away tears. Then, just before the final note, Marcus stopped. He let his hands rest on the keys and took a deep breath. Elena, he said softly into the microphone. She looked at him, confused. Marcus? He stood up slowly, turning to face the audience. Thousands of eyes watched in silence. I was once a man who cleaned floors, he began. People laughed at me for dreaming too big. They said music was for the rich, love was for the lucky, and happiness was for those born with it. But this woman, he turned toward Elena, proved them all wrong. Elena's heart raced. The crowd leaned forward. She saw me when no one else did, Marcus continued. She didn't see a janitor. She saw a man. And because of her, I found my music again. A year had passed since that night when the world stopped to watch a janitor kneel before a billionaire's daughter and rewrite the meaning of love. The memory of Marcus and Elena's onstage proposal had become more than just a viral story. It had become a legend. Their faces were everywhere, in magazines, documentaries, and murals painted by street artists who saw in them something far greater than fame. But Marcus and Elena never cared for the glitter of attention. While the world called them heroes, they quietly chose something different, purpose. They bought a small piece of land on the outskirts of Atlanta and built something. They called the Harmony House. It wasn't a mansion or a music studio, and it was a school, a place where kids who had nothing could learn everything that money couldn't buy: hope, confidence, and the language of music. Marcus believed that every soul had a song, even if the world never gave them a stage to play it on. He taught the children himself, sitting cross-legged beside broken pianos and scratched guitars. His voice was calm, his patience endless. "Don't worry about mistakes," he would tell them. "Mistakes are just notes looking for the right heart to belong to." And when the children played their first imperfect tunes, he would smile and say, "That's music, because it's honest." Elena ran the school with the same passion she once reserved for luxury galas. She sold her jewelry, closed her father's old accounts, and used the money to buy instruments and build classrooms. Sometimes reporters came to cover their story. They always asked her the same question: "Do you ever miss your old life?" She would laugh softly and reply, "I didn't leave my old life. I found the real one." She spent her mornings teaching music theory, her afternoons organizing community concerts, and her evenings watching Marcus play as the children gathered around like fireflies drawn to warmth. One summer afternoon, a government car arrived at the Harmony House. A man in a suit stepped out, holding a letter stamped with a gold seal. "Mr. Hill," he said, handing it over, "the president would like to invite you and Miss Sterling to perform at the National Peace Conference next month." Marcus smiled in disbelief. "From janitor's hallways to the White House, huh?" he joked. The man grinned. "Sir, you didn't climb to the top. You made the top come down to you." That night Marcus sat under the stars with Elena by his side. Fireflies blinked around them as the children's laughter drifted from inside the school. "You ever think we'd get this far?" she asked. He shook his head. "No. I thought I'd die with a mop in my hand and my music locked in my chest. But then you walked into my song." Elena smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you rewrote mine." The Peace Conference performance became one of the most emotional moments in modern history. Marcus and Elena didn't play for politicians or cameras. They played for the world, for every child who dreamed, every worker who was unseen, every person who was told they weren't enough. When they finished, the audience rose to their feet. Some were crying, others just standing in silence, and because sometimes applause isn't enough for what the soul feels. Afterward, one reporter asked Marcus, "What does it feel like to be the man who changed music forever?" He smiled gently. "I didn't change music. I just reminded people it still has a heart." Years passed. The world moved faster, but the Harmony House remained the same, peaceful, warm, full of music. Children who once came there barefoot grew up to become teachers, composers, and musicians. They carried Marcus's words with them wherever they went. "Don't play to impress. Play to express." Marcus grew older, his hair touched with silver, but his hands, oh, those hands, they still played like the sky had rhythm. Elena, now his wife, stood by him at every recital, still clapping the loudest, still looking at him as if he were the miracle she'd been waiting for her whole life. They never called themselves rich, but their days were full of laughter, warmth, and the kind of love that didn't need proving. One rainy evening, Marcus sat alone in the music room after the children had gone home. The piano in front of him was the same one from his first viral night, restored and shining. He ran his fingers across the keys, playing softly. Elena walked in quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. "You never get tired of that song, do you?" she said with a smile. Marcus looked up. "How could I? It started everything." He paused, his voice gentle. "Do you remember the first thing you said to me?" She laughed. "Of course. If you can play this piano beautifully, I'll marry you." Marcus grinned. "And I've been playing ever since." Elena placed her cup beside his and leaned in, kissing his forehead. "Then don't ever stop." The years turned softly after that. When Marcus finally passed away in his sleep at 82, the entire world mourned, not with silence but with music. Every major concert hall played his compositions. Every television channel replayed his performances. At the Harmony House, the children lit candles and played his favorite melody, the same one he had played the night the world first heard him. Elena sat by the window, the same locket in her hand, whispering through tears, "You kept your promise. You never stopped playing." She looked out at the field of children, their music floating into the night, and smiled faintly. "You didn't just marry me, Marcus," she said softly. "You married the world." Years later, the Harmony House grew into an international foundation. On its front gate was a bronze plaque that read, "The world mocked him until they listened." And when they finally did, and they never stopped. Beneath the plaque were two engraved names, Marcus Hill and Elena Sterling, the music that changed everything.